The house goes to Kevin. 4 words. That's how my father's will reading started. A lawyer in a gray suit behind a mahogany desk. A conference room that smelled like old carpet and lemon furniture polish. My father had been dead for 11 days, and my brother was about to laugh in a room where laughing should have been impossible. My name is Meredith Caldwell. I'm 29 years old. My father left my brother Kevin a house worth $1.4 million, stone colonial, 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, white oaks in the yard that my great-grandfather planted in 1941. He left me a shoebox, a Nike shoebox, men's size, 11, from under a workbench in a cedar workshop at the back of the yard. My brother laughed, out loud, in the lawyer's office. Then he threw a housewarming party for 34 people to celebrate the house he'd inherited. He didn't invite me. I came anyway, with the shoebox. I hadn't opened it yet. I'd been waiting for the right room. When I lifted the lid in front of 34 guests, my brother's champagne glass hit the granite counter so hard it cracked. If stories like mine matter to you, that subscribe button means more than you know. Let me take you back to Sycamore Hill, Greenville, South Carolina. A stone colonial set back from the road on a half-acre lot shaded by white oaks that were older than anyone alive in the family. The house had been built by my father, Howard Caldwell, with his own hands and a crew of 4 men from his church. Took him 2 years. He laid every stone himself. He said the house was for the family, but the workshop in the backyard, that was his. He built the workshop alone. Cedar walls he'd milled himself from timber he bought at auction, a workbench he'd leveled with shims and a carpenter square until it was so flat you could set a marble on one end and it wouldn't move. He kept his tools hung on pegboard in order of size. Claw hammer, ball-peen hammer, rubber mallet, then the chisels, then the squares. Everything had a place. Everything in my father's life had a place. My mother, Diane, left when I was 6 and Kevin was 10. She moved to Savannah with a man named Roger Kelly who sold timeshares on Hilton Head. She sent birthday cards for 2 years. Then she stopped. I waited by the mailbox on my 7th birthday until the streetlights came on. I remember the bugs circling the porch light, the sound of the screen door when my father came out. He sat on the step next to me. Didn't say anything for a long time. Then, some people leave, Meredith. It's not about you. It's about what they can't carry. He never badmouthed her. Not once in 23 years. When Kevin asked at Thanksgiving where Mom was, he was 12, I was 8, Dad said, she had to go somewhere. She might come back. She might not. Either way, we're here. He said it the way he said everything. Like a weather report. Not cold. Not warm. Just the temperature. The kids at school asked too. Jessica Palmer asked me in 4th grade if my mom was dead. I said I didn't know. She looked at me like I'd said something from another planet. How can you not know if your mom is dead? I went home and asked Dad. He said, she's alive. She just can't be here right now. He didn't say can't because she was unable. He said can't, the way you say can't about a choice someone made that's too complicated to explain to a 9-year-old eating fish sticks. He never pretended she was coming back. That was my father. He didn't do comfortable lies. He did uncomfortable truths. Quietly, without drama, the way he hung his tools, one at a time, in the right order. And he never rushed the hanging. Kevin was the golden child. I need to be careful with that phrase because my father tried harder than any man I've ever known to treat us equally. He split Christmas gifts to the dollar. He attended every one of Kevin's football games and every one of my science fairs. He rotated who got to ride shotgun. He was meticulous about fairness the way he was meticulous about everything. But Kevin was louder. Kevin took up space in a room the way a bass drum takes up space in a marching band. He played linebacker at Greenville High. Got his name in the Greenville News sports section before he turned 16. People in town knew Kevin Caldwell. When they met me at church or at the grocery store, they'd say, "Oh, you're Kevin's sister." I was quiet. I liked numbers. I liked the way columns of figures could tell a story if you knew how to read them. My father had 3 habits that nobody else noticed. The first, every Saturday morning at 6:15, before I woke up, he swept the workshop floor. Not because it was dirty, because he said a clean floor was respect for the wood. I'd find the broom leaning against the pegboard when I came in at 7, and the concrete would still have faint sweep lines like a Zen garden made of sawdust. The second, he kept a thermos of black coffee on the workbench. Stanley thermos. Green. Dented on one side from the time it fell off the truck in 1998. He poured a cup every hour, on the hour. Not because he was thirsty. Because pouring coffee was how he marked time. Other people checked their watch. My father poured coffee. When he died, I found that thermos in the workshop, still half full. Cold. I poured it out in the garden. It felt like emptying a clock. The third, he measured my height on the workshop wall every January 1st. Pencil marks. My initials. The date. He never measured Kevin's height. Kevin never asked. I never asked why he didn't. I just stood against the wall and felt the pencil touch the top of my head and knew that for 1 minute every year, I was the most important thing in the room. I liked sitting in Dad's workshop on Saturday mornings while he sanded table legs, listening to the rasp of sandpaper against white oak. The air smelled like cedar shavings and machine oil and the faint, burnt sugar smell of the Stanley thermos. He'd let me organize the hardware drawers. Screws sorted by length, nails by gauge, washers by diameter. I was 8 years old. I loved it. We had a thing. A Saturday thing. After the drawers were sorted and the sanding was done, he'd hold up whatever he was working on, a table leg, a cutting board, a picture frame, and he'd turn it slowly in the light from the window. The 4 o'clock light. The light that came through at exactly the right angle to show every flaw and every smooth spot. He'd look at it for 10 seconds. Then he'd look at me, and I'd nod. One nod. Like his. The nod that means it's good. It holds. That was our conversation. A piece of wood. A window. A nod. 20 years of that. Every Saturday. That was how Howard Caldwell said I love you. Not with words, not with hugs, not with speeches. With a piece of white oak held up to the light, and a daughter who knew when to nod. Kevin thought it was weird. He said so at dinner once. Mouth full of mashed potatoes. She's like a little accountant. Sitting out there, counting nails. Dad set down his fork, looked at Kevin for 3 full seconds, then picked up his fork and went back to eating. He didn't say a word, which was its own kind of answer. Christmas, when I was 9. Kevin made his list in November. Wrote it on the back of a cereal box. A Game Boy Color. A paintball gun. Rollerblades. Everything on the list cost more than $50. He taped it to the fridge. Dad read it while drinking his morning coffee and didn't say anything. I didn't make a list. I asked Dad for one thing, a set of precision screwdrivers. The kind with interchangeable bits and a wooden case. I'd seen them at the hardware store when I went with Bill Turner to pick up caulk. $14.99. I wrote the name and the price on a sticky note and slipped it under Dad's coffee mug. Christmas morning. Kevin got the Game Boy. He ripped the paper off before the rest of us sat down. He played it through breakfast, through opening presents, through the dishes. Dad gave me the screwdriver set. Wooden case. 12 bits. A magnetic tip holder. I opened every bit and laid them out on the carpet in order of size. Kevin looked over from his game. More workshop stuff? You know Santa's not a hardware store, right? Dad didn't say anything. He just watched me line up the bits. I used that screwdriver set for 16 years. Kevin lost the Game Boy by February. But on Christmas morning, at 9 years old, I learned that the size of the box doesn't tell you anything about the size of the gift. Dad's 58th birthday. I was 15. Kevin was 19, living at the house, working at the dealership. I'd spent 3 weeks in the workshop building my first dovetail joint. White oak, just like Dad used. The two pieces fit together like fingers, interlacing. It wasn't perfect. One edge was a hair off, and the glue line showed if you looked close, but it held. That was the point. It held. I wrapped it in newspaper, set it by Dad's plate before dinner. Kevin walked in 20 minutes late. No card. No gift. No mention of the birthday at all. He sat down, loaded his plate, and started talking about a truck he'd sold that afternoon, a fully loaded Silverado, 8% over invoice, best deal of the quarter. Dad opened my dovetail, held it up to the kitchen window, turned it slowly in the light, ran his thumb along the joint, didn't say a word, set it on the windowsill above the sink. It stayed there until the day he died. Kevin's quarterly sales record didn't make the windowsill. Junior year, regional math competition. I'd qualified for state. The competition was in Columbia, 90 minutes each way. Kevin was supposed to drive me because Dad had a doctor's appointment for his knee. Kevin said he'd be there at 7:15. 7:15. No, Kevin. 7:30. 7:45. I called his cell 4 times. No answer. I sat on the porch with my graphing calculator and my competition folder and watched the clock on my phone tick past 8 o'clock. The competition started at 9. Registration closed at 8:45. Dad came outside at 8:02, still in his bathrobe, knee brace on. He didn't ask where Kevin was. He just said, "Get in the truck." He drove 90 minutes with a knee that needed replacing and a bathrobe he changed out of at a rest stop near Newberry. We arrived at 8:39. 6 minutes before registration closed, I won. First place. A trophy and a $50 savings bond. When I came out to the lobby, the auditorium was empty. Everyone else's families had gone to lunch. Dad was sitting on a folding chair by the water fountain, still in the shirt he'd thrown on at the rest stop. He stood up, looked at the trophy, looked at me. Show me. I showed him the problem that clinched it. A probability question with nested variables. I explained my approach on the back of a program. He didn't understand the math. He was a builder, not a numbers man, but he listened to every word. Then he said, "That's my girl." And he drove 90 minutes home with his bad knee and never mentioned it again. Kevin, when I told him I'd won, said, "Cool." Was there prize money? $50. In a savings bond. Dad probably smiled when he heard that. His daughter winning savings bonds at 16. The apple doesn't fall far from the workbench. When I was 10, I asked Dad if he missed Mom. We were in the workshop. He was cutting a dovetail joint, the kind where the two pieces of wood locked together like fingers interlacing. He didn't stop cutting. "I miss the idea of her," he said. "The real her left before the door did." I didn't understand that sentence until I was 25. What he meant was, his wife had been leaving in increments for years before the suitcase. The leaving was a process, not a moment. But I was 10, so I just watched him cut the dovetail and tried to understand why two pieces of wood fitting together made him look so sad. He never let me see him sad again after that. Not when Kevin crashed the car. Not when the medical bills from his knee replacement piled up on the kitchen counter. Not when the church friend who'd helped him build the house died of a heart attack at 59, and Dad stood at the funeral in his only suit and didn't cry, but held onto the back of the pew so hard his knuckles went white. He was a man who processed grief the way he processed lumber. He put it through the saw, and what came out the other side was something useful. There were 5 moments I've replayed 1,000 times that should have told me what my father was building. The first was Thanksgiving, when I was 12. Kevin had just gotten his license. He wanted a truck, $6,200. He looked at Dad and said, "So when are we going to the dealer?" Dad cut his turkey. Didn't look up. "When you earn it, Kevin." Kevin laughed. He thought it was a joke. The second was the summer I was 14. Organizing the hardware drawers, I found an envelope tucked behind the finishing nails. Small, white, sealed, labeled in Dad's handwriting, M.A.C. My initials? I didn't open it. I put it back. The third was my high school graduation. I was salutatorian. 600 people. Dad stood up when they called my name. Not clapped, stood. He was the only one standing in his row. He stayed standing until I walked off the stage. Kevin, in the parking lot on his phone, missed the whole thing. He came in during the recessional and said, "Did I miss anything good?" Dad looked at him with the kind of look that says everything and costs nothing because the person receiving it will never understand what they missed. The fourth was a Saturday when I was 21, home from Clemson. In the workshop, I heard Dad on the phone through the window. 1 sentence, 1 every month. Same as always. I didn't know what it meant. I wouldn't know for 8 more years. The fifth was the last Saturday before he got sick. March 2024. We were in the workshop. He was sanding a chess set for the church auction. I was sorting screws. Neither of us spoke for 20 minutes. Then he said, "Meredith, you know the envelope behind the finishing nails? The one with my initials? That's the one. I found it when I was 14. I know. You put it back. I didn't open it. I know that too." He sanded for another minute. Then, "The workbench is the answer, but only if you're the kind of person who kneels down and checks." I didn't understand. He smiled. The first time I'd seen him smile in weeks. Just an old man talking to his workshop. After high school, Kevin stayed local. Got a job at Patterson Chevrolet selling trucks. Good money when the sales were good. Bad money when they weren't. And when they were bad, Kevin came home. Not to visit. To borrow. He borrowed $3,000 from Dad in 2014 to cover a missed truck payment. He said he'd pay it back next quarter. He didn't. He borrowed $1,500 in 2016 for a deposit on a new apartment with granite countertops. He said he'd pay it back when the commission check clears. It didn't. Dad kept a record, not in a ledger, in pencil, on the inside of the workshop door, dates and amounts. I found it after he died. 7 entries. Total, $11,200. Not one repaid. Dad never mentioned it. He just wrote it down and closed the door. Kevin bought a 22-foot bass boat before he bought a dining table. Had a Rolex Submariner before he had health insurance. He came to Sunday dinners and talked about quarterly sales numbers like NFL stats. I went to Clemson on a partial scholarship. Studied accounting. Worked the front desk at a Holiday Inn Express 3 nights a week. Lived on instant oatmeal and library coffee, and a meal plan that ran out every Thursday. When I came home for Thanksgiving, Kevin would be wearing Cole Haan loafers. I'd be in the same corduroy jacket from junior year. Dad noticed. He always noticed. One Thanksgiving, after Kevin had left and I was drying dishes, Dad said, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Meredith. Least of all to him." "I'm not proving anything, Dad." "I know. You're just building. Same as me. One piece at a time." When I passed the CPA exam, I called Dad first. He said, "Good work, Meredith." 2 words. The highest compliment. I called Kevin second. He said, "So now you count other people's money for a living? Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. A joke. The kind that isn't a joke. The kind that sounds like a punchline but lands like a shove. I said, yes, and I'm good at it. He laughed. At least one of us is. After Clemson, I got a job at Becker, Hall, and Associates in Charleston. Mid-size accounting firm. 12 accountants. A conference room with a coffee maker nobody cleaned and a printer that jammed every third Tuesday like it had a personal calendar. Starting salary, $44,000. I shared a one-bedroom with a girl named Jenna who worked nights at the hospital. We split everything to the penny, rent, utilities, even the paper towels. I drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, a tape deck that only played the left channel, and 163,000 miles on the odometer. Kevin drove a Ram with leather seats and a Bose stereo. But I had something Kevin didn't, a CPA study guide and zero debt. Kevin had leather seats and a credit card balance he called strategic leverage. I called it math he hadn't done yet. I didn't mind the Honda. I didn't mind the apartment. I didn't mind the split paper towels. I'd grown up watching my father build a life out of modest materials, and the life he'd built was the sturdiest thing I'd ever seen. I didn't need expensive. I needed steady. There's a difference between those two things that most people my age don't understand until it's too late. My first client was a woman named Dolores Whitaker, no relation to the lawyer. She ran a flower shop on King Street. She brought me a Publix grocery bag full of receipts and invoices and handwritten notes on napkins and a checkbook that hadn't been balanced since October. She set the bag on my desk and said, "I'm a mess. Can you fix it?" I sorted that bag in 2 hours. Receipts by date. Invoices by vendor. Napkin notes cross-referenced against the checking account. I found $3,000 in unclaimed expenses and an insurance deduction she'd been overpaying by $42 a month for 2 years. When I showed her the corrected numbers, she stared at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "How old are you?" 23. My accountant of 15 years never found that. You found it in an afternoon. She sent me 3 more clients that month. All small businesses. All grocery bags of receipts. I loved it. I loved the puzzle of it, the way a box of chaos became rows and columns that told you exactly where the money went and why. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't rewrite history. Numbers don't forget your birthday or show up late to your math competition. Numbers are the most honest language I've ever spoken. The Charleston apartment was 400 square feet. Jenna worked nights, so I had the place to myself from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I studied for the CPA exam at the kitchen table, the same table where we ate dinner, folded laundry, and balanced our own checkbook. 3 textbooks. A desk lamp from Goodwill with a crooked shade. A mug of gas station coffee that I refilled 3 times a night because Folgers was $2 cheaper than the coffee shop on Meeting Street, and I was tracking every dollar the way Dad tracked his bonds. I studied from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., 5 nights a week, for 4 months. Jenna would come home at 7:15 in the morning and find me asleep at the table with my face on the tax code manual. She'd put a blanket over my shoulders. She never said a word about it. Some people are like that. They see the work and they just quietly help it continue. The exam was in May. 4 parts. 18 hours of testing across 3 weeks. I passed all 4 sections on my first attempt. Only 49% of candidates pass all 4 the first time. I know this because I looked it up afterward while sitting in my Honda in the parking lot of the testing center. Not to brag. To measure. The way Dad measured. License number 41,012. I framed it. Not because I was showing off, because my father taught me that the things you earn should be visible, not to impress anyone. To remind yourself the work was real. When I called Dad to tell him, he listened. Then a silence. Then, first try? First try. Good. That's my girl. Same words he'd said at the math competition. Same tone. Same quiet pride that didn't need volume. I hung up and sat in the Honda for 10 minutes, holding my phone, listening to the engine tick. 163,000 miles. A crooked desk lamp. A 400 square foot apartment. And a father who said 4 words like they weighed 100 pounds each. Within a year, I made staff accountant. Within 2, senior staff. Dolores sent a poinsettia to the office every December with a card that said, "To my favorite number cruncher." Becker, the founding partner, started assigning me the complicated returns, the ones with rental properties and depreciation schedules and trusts that had been managed by attorneys who thought accounting was beneath them. I liked the complicated ones. They were puzzles. And I'd been solving puzzles since the hardware drawers. I built a client base the way Dad built a house, one relationship at a time, one conversation at a time, 1 year of trust at a time. By 26, I had 43 clients. By 27, 61. By 28, Mr. Becker called me into his office and said, "I'm making you senior associate. You've earned it." He said, "Earned it," the way Dad said, "That's my girl." Like it was a fact, not a compliment. Like the evidence was so clear that praising it would be redundant. I kept the Honda. I kept the apartment. Jenna had moved out by then. She'd married a resident at MUSC and bought a townhouse in Mount Pleasant, but I kept the 1 bedroom. I liked the size of it. It was enough. Enough is a word Kevin never learned. Enough means you've measured what you need and you stopped when you got there. Kevin never stopped. He just kept reaching for more of everything and holding on to less of it every time. Dad came to Charleston once. I picked him up at the Greyhound station because he didn't like flying and wouldn't let me buy him a ticket anyway. He walked through my apartment slowly, the way he walked through the workshop, measuring, assessing, noticing the things most people miss. The level bookshelf. The organized pantry. The small desk by the window where I'd studied for the CPA. He stopped at my framed license on the wall. 41,012, he read. Good number. That was the whole review. We ate takeout on the couch and watched Jeopardy, and he fell asleep in the chair before Final Jeopardy. I covered him with the blanket Jenna used to put over my shoulders. The apartment was quiet. The street was quiet. My father was sleeping 6 feet away from me, and for the first time in a long time, the world felt like it had all its pieces in the right drawer. Kevin moved back into the house on Sycamore Hill. Said he was helping Dad after the knee replacement. What he was doing was living rent-free, eating Dad's food, parking his Ram in the driveway, and leaving the leaking gutter unfixed for 4 months after Dad asked twice. When I visited on weekends, I fixed things, quietly, the way Dad had taught me. The way he fixed things without announcement, without complaint, just the specific physical act of making something work that hadn't been working. I replaced the washer in the kitchen faucet one Saturday morning. The drip had been there for months. Kevin hadn't noticed it. He'd never notice a drip. A drip is a small problem, and Kevin only recognized problems that were large enough to be complaints. I tightened the loose railing on the back porch. I recaulked the entire guest bathroom, peeling caulk around the tub, cracking grout along the tile, a window frame that let cold air in during winter. I did it on a Saturday morning while Kevin watched the Alabama game in the den. He ate nachos. The game ran 3 hours. The caulking took me 2. Neither of us spoke during either. Dad watched me caulk. He stood in the doorway. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He just watched the way I ran the beads straight, even, no gaps, and he nodded once. Then he went back to the workshop and closed the door. I know now what he was doing in there. 1 bond. Every month. Same as always. What would you have done? Would you have kept doing the quiet work? Or would you have walked away? Drop your honest answer in the comments. Dad got sick in the fall of 2024. Pancreatic cancer. 8 to 12 months. He had 8. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Chen, at Greenville Memorial. I know because Kevin texted me, not called, texted 2 hours after the appointment. Dad has cancer. Pancreas. Not great. 9 words. I called Dad directly. He answered on the second ring. His voice was the same voice he used for everything level, steady. The voice of a man who had already decided how he was going to carry this. 8 to 12 months, he said. I've got things to finish. I knew what he meant. The workshop, the bonds, the things he'd been building in silence for 30 years. He wasn't talking about getting better. He was talking about getting done. I drove from Charleston every weekend, 5 hours each way on I-26. Left Friday after work. Arrived at 10 p.m. Left Sunday at noon to make it back for Monday morning. I knew the highway the way you know a prayer by repetition, without thinking. The exits. The rest stops. The gas station in Newberry, where the coffee was bad but the bathrooms were clean. The mile marker near Lawrence, where the cell signal dropped and you had 2 minutes of silence, whether you wanted it or not. I used those 2 minutes. I used them the way Dad used the workshop, as a place to think, without interruption. Kevin lived in the house, 10 minutes from the hospital, a 15-minute drive on a clear day. He visited twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday, 45 minutes each time. He'd bring a sports magazine and sit in the chair by the window and scroll his phone and leave before the dinner tray arrived. I visited every Saturday and Sunday. I read to Dad not novels, not self-help, the Greenville News sports section, because he liked knowing what the high school teams were doing, even though he hadn't been to a game in years. I adjusted his pillows. I argued with the billing department about a scan that insurance had already covered. I brought the red Jell-O from the cafeteria because the nurses kept bringing green, and Dad hated green, with the specificity of a man who had opinions about very few things, but held the ones he had with absolute conviction. I brought Dad food from home every visit. The hospital meals were bland, and he hated the texture of the mashed potatoes. Tastes like spackling compound, he said, which was the funniest thing he'd said in months. I made him cornbread. I made him chicken soup from scratch. I brought it in a Tupperware container wrapped in a dish towel to keep it warm. Kevin came one Saturday when I was there. He saw the cornbread on the bedside table. He picked up a piece without asking. Ate it while standing in the doorway scrolling his phone. Didn't say thank you. Didn't ask who made it. Didn't ask Dad how he was feeling. Just ate the cornbread I'd baked at 5 in the morning and wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "Not bad. You should sell this at the stand." Dad watched him eat the cornbread. He watched the way Kevin took without acknowledging, and I saw something cross his face that I didn't recognize until later. It wasn't anger. It was confirmation. The look of a man who has been watching his hypothesis prove itself, one data point at a time, for 29 years. The nurses knew me. Karen Halstead, at the desk. Paul Crawford, night shift. Linda Patterson, who snuck Dad extra Jell-O because he reminded her of her own father. They waved when I came in. They didn't know Kevin. He came during visiting hours and left before dinner. One Saturday, Dad was alert enough to talk. His voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it. Paper thin. He looked at me from the bed with those blue eyes that still saw everything even though the rest of him was leaving. The workshop's unlocked. It's always unlocked. I know, Dad. Nothing in there worth stealing. Unless you know where to look. I thought it was the medication. The morphine blurring things. I held his hand and didn't ask what he meant. I should have asked, but I didn't, because I trusted him. And trusting him meant trusting that the things he didn't say were things he'd find another way to tell me. The last Good Saturday, I brought him Jell-O red, not green, and the sports section. He couldn't hold the paper anymore, so I read it to him. Greenville High lost to Malden by 3. Defense, he whispered. Always defense. I laughed. He almost laughed. His eyes did what his lungs couldn't. I told him about a client, a retired teacher whose pension was being miscalculated by the state. I'd found the error in 20 minutes. Saved her $11,000 over 3 years. Dad listened, nodded. Screws by length, he said. Nails by gauge. I said, same idea, different drawer. He closed his eyes. I thought he was sleeping. Then he squeezed my hand once. Hard. The way you squeeze something you're about to let go of. He died on a Wednesday in March. I was holding his hand. The monitors beeped twice. Then they didn't. The room went from the sound of living to the sound of a machine that no longer had a purpose. Linda Patterson, the nurse, came in. She adjusted the monitors. She dimmed the lights. She put her hand on my shoulder. Take your time, she said. He's not in a hurry. The room smelled like disinfectant and the lavender lotion Linda used on his hands every morning. The clock on the wall said 2:47 p.m. Kevin was in the parking lot, on the phone with a dealership in Spartanburg, negotiating the trade-in value on his truck. He came in 12 minutes after Dad died. Linda told him quietly. He stood in the doorway, looked at the bed, looked at me, looked at the floor. I was just on the phone. I know. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask if Dad said anything at the end. He didn't ask about the monitors, or the morphine, or the last breath. He asked if the nurse needed the room by a certain time. The funeral was Saturday. 208 people. Kevin gave the eulogy. 7 minutes. Football stories. He called the workshop Dad's Man Cave. Got a polite laugh. I spoke for 90 seconds. I said Dad hung his tools in order of size, and his silences were a language. That was enough. The will reading. Tuesday. Douglas Whitaker, attorney. Kevin in a blazer. Me in the funeral dress. The residence at 41 Sycamore Hill Drive, valued at approximately $1.4 million, is bequeathed in its entirety to Kevin Michael Caldwell. Kevin nodded, like a man receiving a package that was owed. To Meredith Ann Caldwell, I leave the contents of the shoebox under my workbench. She'll know where to find it. Kevin laughed, out loud. 11 days after our father's funeral. A shoebox. She gets a shoebox? Whitaker looked at him over his glasses. Mouth tightened. Probably some old photos. Maybe a pocket watch? I drove to the house that evening. Kevin was inside measuring the living room. I went around back. Through the side gate, Dad welded. Past the white oaks. Into the workshop. The door was unlocked. Always was. I pulled the light chain. Bare bulb. Shadows on the pegboard. Cedar and machine oil. Pencil marks on the wall measuring my height. The last one 3 inches below the pegboard. I knelt beside the workbench. Found the shoebox. Yellow-gray cardboard. Nike. Size 11. Heavy. I did not open it. I stood in the workshop holding that box with both hands, and I felt the weight of it, not physical weight, though it was heavier than I expected, but the weight of 30 years of monthly trips to a bank or a post office or wherever you buy savings bonds when you're a man who plans in silence and builds in increments and trusts that the daughter who sorts screws will be the one who kneels down and checks. I had an idea, and the idea required 34 witnesses, because a shoebox opened in a workshop is a private discovery. A shoebox opened at a housewarming party in front of the man who laughed at it in the house he inherited. On the granite counter he's already showing off is something else entirely. 3 weeks later, Kevin threw a housewarming party. Printed invitations. You are invited to celebrate the Caldwell family home. now in the care of Kevin Michael Caldwell. He invited 34 people, Dad's friends, church members, neighbors, the Hansons, Bill Turner from the hardware store, Larry and Carol Mitchell. He did not invite me. Jessica, my high school friend, who married Kevin's friend Tom, called me Wednesday. Kevin's having a party Saturday. He told everyone you were taking some time. He didn't ask me. I know. That's why I'm calling. Saturday afternoon, May. The dogwood was blooming white petals on the walkway like confetti for a parade nobody requested. Cars lined the driveway and the street in front of the house. 34 people. Kevin had hired a caterer, finger sandwiches, and bruschetta on platters from a place in downtown Greenville. There was a champagne station in the kitchen. 2 cases of Veuve Clicquot. I did the math later. $84 a bottle? $1,680 in champagne alone, from a house he'd owned for 3 weeks and hadn't earned a single stone of. The front door was open. Music Kevin's Bluetooth speaker playing something jazzy and confident. People milling through the rooms. Kevin's voice carrying from the kitchen where he was giving tours. This is the original stone. Dad laid every piece himself. This island is Calicut marble. The Viking has 6 burners. He was narrating the house the way a museum guide narrates an exhibit, except the builder was dead and the narrator hadn't swung a hammer in his life. I stood on the walkway for a full minute before I walked in. I was holding the shoebox against my hip the way my father used to hold his toolbox. One arm, secure, the weight familiar. I walked in carrying the shoebox. He saw me. His smile froze for 1 second. Meredith, I didn't think you were coming. You didn't invite me. The room shifted. 34 people adjusting their weight. I thought you needed space. I needed the workshop. But this will do. I set the shoebox on the granite counter. Between the champagne bucket and a cheese board from church, Kevin recognized it. Yellow-gray cardboard. What are you doing? Opening my inheritance. In the family home. Like you said, it's for the family. Bill Turner set down his drink. Carol Mitchell put her hand on Larry's arm. Can you feel what happens next? If you think Kevin deserved what he saw, drop it in the comments. I lifted the lid. Savings bonds. United States Treasury. Series EE. Stacked in neat rows. Bundled with rubber bands, 12 to a bundle, 1 for each month. On top of each bundle, a year in Dad's blue ink handwriting. 1,993 through 2023. 360 bonds. 1 every month. For 30 years. He started in 1993. I was born in 1996. He'd been buying them 3 years before I existed. The room went museum silent. I held up the first bundle. 1,993. 1 bond. Every month. For 30 years. Before I was born? Before he knew I'd be the kind of child who'd sort his screws. Kevin set down his champagne. Not placed. Set. The way you set something down when your hands stop trusting themselves. Bill Turner stepped closer. Every single one made out to 1 person. I held up a bond so the room could see the name printed on the front. Meredith Ann Caldwell. Every single one. 360 bonds. Every one with the same name. Not Kevin's. Not the children. Not the Caldwell family. Mine, specifically, individually. The way my father did everything with precision, with intention, with the same care he used to level a workbench with shims until a marble wouldn't move. Carol Mitchell made a sound. Not a word. Air, leaving a body that had been holding it since the lid came off. The Hansons, who'd lived next door for 22 years and brought casseroles when Dad was sick, looked at each other. Mrs. Hanson's lips were pressed together. Hanson had his arms crossed and his chin down, the way men stand when they're watching something they should have seen coming but didn't. Jessica was standing in the kitchen doorway, tears on both cheeks. She told me later she'd wanted to applaud but didn't because it wasn't that kind of room. She was right. It was quieter than applause. It was the sound of 34 people understanding a story they'd only heard the first chapter of. Kevin's face was doing something I'd never seen. The look of a man watching a room full of people discover that the story he'd been telling, the chosen son, the favored child, was a fraction of a larger truth. At the bottom of the box, an envelope, white, unsealed. Inside, a single sheet, lined. Legal pad. Dad's blue ink. I read it out loud. 34 people. So quiet I could hear Kevin's champagne bubbles. Meredith, your brother will sell the house. I love him, but I know who he is. He'll have the money, and it'll be gone in 3 years. Maybe less. Kevin's jaw tightened. This is yours. 360 bonds. I bought one every month since 1993. I didn't know you'd be you yet, but I knew I'd need to be ready for someone who would notice. Bill Turner closed his eyes. Current estimated value, $487,000. Brooke, Kevin's wife, stopped moving. She looked at Kevin, then at the bonds, the kind of look that recalculates everything. Nobody can touch this. Not Kevin. Not a lawyer. Not a creditor. These are yours, and only yours. I put them where I knew you'd come looking. Under the workbench, where you used to sort the screws. Mrs. Hanson put her hand over her mouth. I'm proud of you, Meredith. I was always proud of you. I just didn't say it often enough. Words were never my best tool. I paused. The room was holding its breath. Build something, kiddo. Something steady. Love, Dad. I folded the letter. Slowly, the way my father folded things once, precisely, with the crease where it belonged. I put it back in the envelope. Put the envelope back in the box. Close the lid. The sound of the lid closing was the loudest thing in the room. Cardboard on cardboard. A whisper that carried. 34 people. Not one sound. The caterer, a young woman named Amy who'd been refilling champagne glasses all afternoon, had stopped moving. She was standing by the sink holding a bottle of Veuve Clicquot with both hands and staring at the shoebox on the granite counter. She told Jessica later that she'd catered 100 parties and never seen a room go that quiet. Like the air left, she said. Like the house itself was listening. Kevin was behind the granite counter, the counter in the house Dad built, the house he hadn't earned, hands flat on the stone, eyes wet. Bill Turner spoke first. Not to Kevin. To me, how long has that been under there? 30 years. Did your father tell anyone? No. He just bought them. One every month. And he waited. Larry Mitchell turned to Carol. The house is $1.4 million. The shoebox is $500,000. And it's still growing. Howard gave Kevin the one that loses value, and Meredith the one that gains. Kevin heard that. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. His voice came out louder than the room wanted. Dad always said the house was for the family. He wanted Emmy to have it. That's why it's in the will. That's what he intended. I held up the letter. Dad's blue ink. Lined paper. Your brother will sell the house. I love him, but I know who he is. Kevin's face went flat. Pastor David Coleman, who'd helped Dad lay the foundation stones 30 years ago, set down his glass of sweet tea on the mantel. He crossed his arms. He didn't look away. You can't ambush me at my own party, Meredith. This is my house. These are my guests. You didn't invite me, Kevin. I invited myself. The way Dad invited me to the workshop every Saturday while you watched TV. The difference is, I showed up. Brooke leaned in. Her voice was lower, practical. The voice of a woman doing math. Kevin, how much are the bonds worth? Kevin turned to me. His eyes shifted. The anger thinned. Something transactional crept in. The car dealer face. The closing face. We should split them. 50-50. That's what Dad would have wanted. Equal. They have one name on them, Kevin. Mine. Every single one. For 30 years. There's nothing to split. He wouldn't have. He wrote a letter. In his own hand. He said exactly what he wanted. He put it in a box under a workbench you never once kneeled beside. Kevin opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Brooke looked at him. Then at the bonds on the counter. Then at him again. The arithmetic was done. Tom Garrett, Jessica's husband, Kevin's college friend, shifted his weight by the dining room archway. He looked at the floor. Then at Kevin. Then at the floor again. He didn't say a word. His silence said everything. Ed Richardson, Dad's oldest friend from the church building crew, was standing by the fireplace with his hands in his pockets. He'd helped Dad frame the workshop roof in 1994. He'd known about the Saturday visits. He'd known about the hardware drawers. He nodded once. Not to me, to the heir, to Howard. Denise Patterson from Patterson Chevrolet, Kevin's former boss's wife, was standing near the kitchen island. She set her champagne flute down on the granite so carefully it didn't make a sound. She looked at Kevin the way you look at a car you just realized has been in a flood. Still shiny. Ruined underneath. Mike Drummond, who'd worked with Kevin at the dealership for 4 years, was leaning against the doorframe between the kitchen and the living room. He uncrossed his arms. He crossed them again. He couldn't find a posture that fit what he was feeling. He told Tom later he kept thinking about the $11,000 on the workshop door. Ruth Ann Foster, who'd been in Dad's church group for 18 years and brought deviled eggs to every funeral in the county, was sitting on the living room couch. She put both hands on her knees. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was praying. I could see it. Coach Henderson, who'd coached Kevin in football and still said, Kevin Caldwell, best nose for the ball I ever saw, was standing by the back door with his arms at his sides. He looked at Kevin, then at me, then at the shoebox. He shook his head once. The slow shake of a man who spent 20 years praising the wrong kid. James Whitaker, the lawyer's son who ran the copy shop on Church Street and had printed Kevin's housewarming invitations on cardstock 2 weeks earlier, was holding an untouched plate of bruschetta. He set it down on the mantel and left the room. He came back 30 seconds later. He just needed to breathe somewhere the air was lighter. Mrs. Palmer, Jessica Palmer's mother, the woman who'd asked me in 4th grade if my mom was dead, was by the front window. She had both hands around her wine glass. Not drinking. Holding. Her eyes were red. Kevin's voice dropped. Controlled. The voice of a man who sells trucks and knows when a deal is slipping. You planned this. You sat on that box for 3 weeks and planned this to humiliate me. You laughed at a shoebox, Kevin. 11 days after our father's funeral, in a lawyer's office. You laughed out loud. All I did was open it. The room held that sentence the way you hold a photograph too old to touch carefully, at the edges, knowing it could tear. Bill Turner said, quietly, to Ed Richardson beside him, Howard always was the smartest man in the room. He just never needed anyone to know it. Pastor Coleman uncrossed his arms. He looked at the ceiling Howard had drywalled and plastered himself, the ceiling Kevin had never looked up at long enough to notice the seamwork, and he exhaled. The kind of exhale that carries 30 years of watching a family and finally understanding the arithmetic. Brooke was staring at her husband, not with sympathy, with arithmetic. The house was $1.4 million. The shoebox was $500,000 and growing, and the man standing behind the granite counter with a cracked champagne glass had just learned in front of 34 people, that his father had planned for exactly this moment. The moment when the son who never kneeled down would discover what the daughter who did had always been worth. That's because you never looked, Kevin. The workshop was always unlocked. The workbench was always there. The shoebox was always underneath. You just never kneeled down. The room absorbed that sentence. I could feel it settle into the space the way sawdust settles on a workbench after a long day, slowly, completely covering everything. I picked up the box, tucked it under my arm, walked past Kevin, who hadn't moved, whose hands were still flat on the granite, whose champagne was still cracked on the counter, and toward the door. The crowd parted. Not dramatically, just slightly. The way people move when they understand they're standing inside a moment that doesn't belong to them. I walked past the wraparound porch, the porch Dad built. The white oaks were dropping petals on the walkway. I caught one in my open palm. Small, white, weightless. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But I was always looking. Dad knew that. He always knew that. Kevin listed the house 3 weeks after the party. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. Bill Turner drove past it on his way to the hardware store. He told me later he sat in his truck for a full minute just staring at it. Your father built that house with his own hands, he said, stone by stone. And Kevin listed it the way you'd list a used lawnmower. Kevin sold the house 4 months later, 1.3 to 8 million. After the realtor's 6% closing costs and the property taxes he hadn't paid in the months since Dad died, he netted 1.1 to 9 million. Dad was right. He always was. By September, new bass boat, a 34-foot yellowfin, more boat than any man in Greenville needed. A fully loaded Ram 2500 because the old one didn't have the right features. A condo in Myrtle Beach, his realtor called an investment opportunity, which is what realtors call things when the investment is mostly theirs. By March, 400,000 gone. A sports bar in Spartanburg he named Caldwell's. It lasted 4 months, which was 3 months longer than anyone at the church expected. Money loaned to a friend who disappeared. Condo listed at a loss. Boat in storage at $400 a month because selling it would mean admitting it was a mistake, and Kevin doesn't admit mistakes. By Christmas, building supply store in Simpsonville, $16 an hour. 1.4 million to a building supply store in 22 months. Dad wrote it in one sentence. It didn't even take 2. Brooke left in January. Took the kids to Charlotte. She told Jessica she didn't sign up for a man who can't keep what he's given. My bonds are still growing. I redeemed the matured ones on a schedule. Reinvested in index funds. Kept my apartment. Kept my job. Made senior associate. I drive a sensible Honda. Cook my own meals. Have a savings account that makes me feel like my father is standing behind me in a doorway, nodding. Kevin called once. March. Voice flat. I need help. No. Just the boat storage fees. No. You have $500,000. I have what Dad gave me. He gave it because he knew what I'd do with it. He gave you the house because he knew what you'd do with it. We both got exactly what we were supposed to get. Silence. He really wrote that? Blue ink. Lined paper. Under the workbench. In the exact spot where I used to sort his screws. I didn't know he kept things under there. I know. That was the point. Last month, I drove back to Greenville. New family in the house. 2 kids. Golden retriever. The white oaks are still there. The wraparound porch has a swing Dad would have approved of. I walked around back. The workshop is a garden shed now. Pegboard gone. Workbench gone. But the pencil marks on the wall are still there. 15 years of my height. Dad's handwriting. Jenna visited last weekend. We sat on my balcony with sweet tea. Do you miss the house? I miss the workshop, the pegboard, the way the light came through at 4 o'clock, the cedar smell. You could build one. I've been thinking about it. Small, cedar walls, one workbench, a pegboard. What would you put in it? Tools, in order of size. My name is Meredith Caldwell. I'm 29 years old. My father spent 30 years buying one savings bond every month because he believed in the kind of person I'd become. He started before I was born. He finished 3 months before he died. The last bond was dated December 2023. He bought it from his hospital bed. Karen at the desk confirmed it. He signed it with a shaking hand. 360 bonds. 30 years. One man's faith in a daughter who liked to sort screws. Kevin sold the house in 8 months. The money lasted less than 2 years. My shoebox is still paying dividends. Some gifts look like nothing at first. A cardboard box. Rubber bands. Faded ink. But the people who kneel down and check the ones who look in the places no one else bothers find what was always meant for them. Not because they were loved more, but because they were built to carry it. If someone in your life has been planning for you in silence, sit with that. The quiet ones don't always say it, but they always mean it. I'll be right here on the porch when you're ready for the next one.